Thank you, Dr. Steele. Dr. Coughlin.
Chairman Coughlin and members of the subcommittee, distinguished guests, thank you for the privilege of testifying today. I'm Steve Coughlin. I've worked as an epidemiologist for over 25 years, including positions as a senior cancer epidemiologist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and as associate professor of epidemiology and director of the program in public health ethics at Tulane University. I chaired the writing group that prepared the ethics guidelines for the American College of Epidemiology and have authored or edited several key texts on public health ethics and ethics in epidemiology. For the past 4.5 years, I was a senior epidemiologist in the Office of Public Health at the Department of Veterans Affairs. In December 2012, I resigned my position in the U.S. Civil Service because of serious ethical concerns that I'm here to testify about today. The Office of Public Health conducts large studies of the health of American veterans. However, if the studies produce results that do not support the Office of Public Health's unwritten policy, they don't release them. This applies to data regarding adverse health consequences of environmental exposures, such as burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, and toxic exposures in the Gulf War. On the rare occasions when embarrassing study results are released, data are manipulated to make them unintelligible. The 2009-2010 National Health Study of a new generation of U.S. veterans targeted 60,000 OIF and OEF veterans and cost $10 million, not including the salaries of those who worked on it and were employed by the VA. 20 to 30% of these veterans were also Gulf War air veterans, and the study produced data regarding their exposures to pesticides, oil well fires, and pyridostigmine bromide pills. It also included meticulously coded data as to what medications they were taking. The Office of Public Health has not released these data or even disclosed the fact that this important information on Gulf War veterans exists. Anything that supports the position that Gulf War illness is a neurological condition is unlikely to ever be published. I co-authored a journal article for publication on important research findings from the New Generation study having to do with the relationship between exposures to burn pits and other inhalational hazards in asthma and bronchitis in OIF veterans. My immediate supervisor, Dr. Aaron Schneiderman, told me not to look at data regarding hospitalizations and doctor's visits. The tabulated findings obscure rather than highlight important associations. When I advised him I did not want to continue as a co-investigator under these circumstances, he threatened me. Speaking as a senior epidemiologist with almost 30 years of research experience, there is no reason to work night and day for years on a complex data collection effort which costs U.S. taxpayers millions of dollars if you're not comfortable putting your name on publications stemming from the study or if no scientific publications are released. Another example of important data that have never been released are the results of the Gulf War Family Registry, which was mandated by Congress. These were physical examinations provided at no charge to Gulf War veterans' family members. I have been advised that these results have been permanently lost. The Office of Public Health has also manipulated information regarding veterans' health through the questions included in their surveys. During the preparation of a major survey of Gulf War air veterans, of which I was principal investigator, the follow-up study of a national cohort of Gulf War and Gulf Air veterans, the Research Advisory Committee on Gulf War Illness made extensive recommendations regarding changes to the survey. I considered many of those changes as very constructive, and some were adopted. The VA Chief of Staff, Mr. John Gingrich, directed my supervisors to send the Gulf War study scientific protocol and draft questionnaire out for additional objective scientific peer review. The OPH Chief Science Officer, Dr. Michael Peterson, contacted a longtime friend of his who is Dean of the U.S. School of Public Health. The Dean identified a faculty member at his school, although the individual has no background in Gulf War health research. My direct supervisor, Dr. Schneiderman, spoke with the peer reviewer and told him that the Research Advisory Committee comments were politically motivated, i.e. not objective in nature. The reviewer responded that he would certainly try to help out. Not surprisingly, the reviewer's comments were highly favorable. The Chief of Staff, Mr. Gingrich, was never informed that the outside reviewer worked for a friend of Dr. Peterson's. My supervisors also made false statements in writing to the Chief of Staff. For example, they falsely stated that putting the study on hold long enough to further revise the questionnaire would cost the government $1 million, delay the study for a year or longer, and potentially result in contract default. None of that was true. The contract for the study was specifically worded in a way that the contractor was only paid for each deliverable as they completed that piece of the work product. As a result, the Chief of Staff ordered the survey to proceed without the changes. The Office of Public Health also handles VA dealings with the Institute of Medicine, which is part of the National Academies of Science. Congress and VA leadership rely on the IOM for authoritative, objective information on medical science. I have personally served on IOM committees and workshops having to do with public health ethics. Last year, the Department of Veterans Affairs contracted with the IOM for a congressionally mandated study of treatments for chronic multisymptom illness in Gulf War veterans. Many Gulf War veterans were distressed that 5 speakers selected to brief the IOM committee presented the view that the illness may be psychiatric, although science has long discredited that position. My understanding is that Dr. Peterson identified the speakers the IOM should invite. I wish to close with a subject of particular importance to me. Almost 2,000 research participants from the National Health Study of a new generation of U.S. veterans self-reported that they had thoughts in the previous 2 weeks that they would be better off dead. However, only a small percentage of those veterans, roughly 5%, ever received a callback from a study clinician. Some of those veterans are now homeless or deceased. I was unsuccessful in getting senior Office of Public Health officials to address this problem in the New Generation study. I was successful in incorporating these callbacks in the Gulf War survey, and they have saved lives, but only after my supervisors threatened to remove me from the study and attempted disciplinary action against me when I appealed their refusal to provide for callbacks to a higher authority. I urge this committee to direct VA to immediately identify procedures to ensure that veterans who participate in VA large-scale epidemiologic studies receive appropriate follow-up care so that this tragedy is not repeated. I also urge you to initiate legislation to cure the epidemic of serious ethical problems in the Office of Public Health I've described to you today. In view of the pervasive pattern where some of these officials fail to tell the truth, even to VA leadership, VA cannot be expected to reform itself. These problems impact the balance of risks and benefits of federally funded human subjects research costing tens of millions of dollars and which fail to serve the interests of the veterans they are intended to benefit. The VA mental health professionals who made callbacks for the 2012 Gulf War Fallout Survey, who were over at the VA Medical Center here in DC, saved lives and ameliorated human suffering. They help vulnerable research participants get access to health care benefits to which they are entitled to by acts of Congress. When you're suffering from a neurologic condition, such as Gulf War illness or traumatic brain injury, or a psychiatric condition, such as major depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, it can be extremely difficult to navigate the bureaucratic procedures for gaining access to health care benefits. That's why it's essential to have clinical psychologists, licensed clinical social workers, and other mental health professionals as co-investigators on these large-scale national surveys. The quality of measures to assist research participants who are experiencing pronounced psychological distress varies widely across epidemiologic studies conducted by the Department of Veterans Affairs, studies that are targeting hundreds of thousands of U.S. Servicemen and women and U.S. veterans. In some studies, such as the National Health Study for a New Generation of U.S. Veterans, only a small percentage or none of the research participants who self-report suicide ideation receive a callback from a study clinician.
I'm going to have to
This
remind
practice
the
is
witnesses.
unethical and should be strongly discouraged.
I'm going to have to try and remind the witnesses to try and keep it at 5 minutes. You're at 10 minutes right now, and because we're going to have to return to vote in a little while, and so we want to get through as much as we possibly can.